Fasting is hungering for God. And it sounds so simple, but I want you to know that when you fast, there are some things you should probably expect, such as the fun wearing off after a while. It eventually becomes a grind. At some point, you start to hear a voice saying, "What's the point? This is ridiculous." When you want to quit the most, that is when the fast is most effective. Not only does God notice you, but Satan notices you as well when you fast. Ghrelin is a hormone found in your body. In the simplest terms, this is what causes your stomach to growl. Ghrelin is this hormone, also known as the hunger hormone, that causes your stomach to growl and also triggers the feeling of hunger in your body. Nobody has to go around remembering to eat because you have ghrelin, and ghrelin assaults you about every 2 to 3 hours, grumbling and making you aware that you need to eat. Nobody tries to remember to eat because hunger hormones agitate you throughout the day and say, "Please feed me. You haven't eaten anything for lunch. You haven't eaten anything for breakfast. Please feed me." You might say, "Why do I need to hunger for God?" The truth is that if you do not chase God, you will spend your time wasted on things that are definitely lower value. The story is told in the book of 2 Kings 6-7, and the Bible says that the city was completely surrounded. Israel was cut off, and all the inhabitants were under siege. They had run out of food, the rations had run out, and they were in a desperate situation. They became so desperate because they didn't have anything to eat that they started fighting over things that they would never normally consume and eat. 2 Kings 6:24-33. Sometime later, Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, mobilized his entire army and marched up and laid siege to Samaria. There was a great famine in the city. The siege lasted so long that a donkey's head sold for 80 shekels of silver, and a quarter of a cab of seed pods for 5 shekels. As the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried to him, "Help me, my lord the king." The king replied, "If the Lord does not help you, where can I get help for you? From the threshing floor? From the wine press?" Then he asked her, "What's the matter?" She answered, "This woman said to me, 'Give up your son so we may eat him today, and tomorrow we'll eat my son.' So we cooked my son and ate him. The next day I said to her, 'Give up your son so we may eat him.' But she had hidden him." When the king heard the woman's words, he tore his robes. As he went along the wall, the people looked and they saw that, under his robes, he had sackcloth on his body. For example, the Bible says that the people in the city became so hungry that they would peel the skin off of a donkey's head and cook it for 80 pieces of silver. And that was how desperate they were to have anything to eat. And if that wasn't bad enough, the Bible provided another example, stating that the people were so hungry that you could buy a cup of dove's dung for 5 pieces of silver. Dove squandering. When you're hungry, if you don't eat the right things to satisfy your hunger, you'll start eating things you never said you'd eat. If you don't direct your spiritual hunger and seasons to feed and hunger after spiritual things, those hungers will lead you astray. If you don't direct them toward God and the Word and worship and a closer relationship with Jesus, those hungers will lead you astray. You'll start feeding on things from the internet, and you'll start feeding on things that are carnal, and you'll start drying up. And spiritually, it's been so long since you've had a touch of Jesus. Because you're feeding only the carnal things, and it's really a God hunger that's crying out, "Come back to me. Come, seek me in fasting and prayer, and draw close to me, and I will draw close to you." But we never take the time to feed our spiritual hunger for more of God. And when we try to substitute junk food, donkey's heads and dove's dung, if you don't address that spiritual hunger for more of God, you will start filling it with more and more, and we try so desperately to fill what only God can fill. And it's another thing, another trip. Let me try this new project. And we continue to try to satisfy our God hunger, but there is a gnawing and a grumbling inside that says, nothing can meet the need of God in your life but seeking Him. And when He appears, when you seek Him first, all these things will be added to you. According to the Bible, there were lepers outside of that city. In other words, they were an outcast. It's bad to be inside the city, literally, where people are buying and eating donkeys' heads and dove's dung. And these guys were even more desperate because they were lepers. And that disease caused literal parts of their body to fall off. And spiritually speaking, their life was falling to pieces. They were outcasts. You're not even important enough to be on the inside with the rest of us, they were told. As a side note, you must not allow the devil to tell you that you are unimportant. You will not allow your adversary to tell you that you are unimportant. You don't dare to let the enemy convince you that you should just sit there and die. Because sometimes the most unlikely people are the most hungry. People who are the most disadvantaged and overlooked are often told, "You're not pretty enough, you're not talented enough, you're not gifted enough." But if they have hunger, watch out, because hunger can do for you what talent and gifting cannot. There were 4 lepers outside the wall in the story. They were outcasts, and their lives were falling apart, but they were hungry, so hungry that they said, "I can't," and they asked, "Why sit here until we die?" The only thing that will move you out of your comfort zone, out of complacency, and into the things that only God can do for you is hunger. He said, the only thing that will get you there is hunger. Hunger was the only thing that got them out of their funk. Hunger was the only thing that pushed them. Hunger was the only thing that motivated them to start moving toward their destiny in a brighter day. And hunger will drive and push you. And fasting is hungering for God. The Bible said there were 4 of them. And I believe one of them was sitting there thinking about tacos. One was sitting there thinking about fried chicken. And the other was thinking about Krispy Kreme donuts. But one person stood up and said, "I am unable to sit here. I won't be able to have another year like this one. We're going to pass away. Why should we stay here until we die?" He says, "You know, if we enter the city, he'll keep us alive, and we'll live. But if they kill us, we'll die." 2 Kings 7, 3-12. Now there were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. They said to each other, "Why stay here until we die? If we say we'll go into the city, the famine is there, and we will die. And if we stay here, we will die. So let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we will live. If they kill us, then we will die." At dusk they got up and went to the camp of the Arameans. When they reached the edge of the camp, no one was there, for the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses and a great army, so that they said to one another, "Look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us." So they got up and fled in the dusk and abandoned their tents and their horses and donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives. The men who had leprosy reached the edge of the camp, entered one of the tents and ate and drank. Then they took silver, gold, and clothes and went off and hid them. They returned and entered another tent and took some things from it and hid them also. Then they said to each other, "What we're doing is not right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let's go at once and report this to the royal palace." The hunger became a driving force in their lives. He became hungry and exclaimed, "There's got to be more." And it was his hunger that first pushed him in the direction of God's plan, purpose, and miracle for him. There are things that God will do for people who hunger for him, who fast and pray, because fasting is hungering for God. And when you begin to hunger for God, you suddenly move up out of the challenges and the comfort zone, and you move out of self-pity, depression, and hopelessness. And the hunger moved them, and they began to take steps. In the West, we are all well-fed physically, but are we well-fed spiritually? We don't understand hunger, you see. I'm referring to people who are in desperate need of food. And what I want you to understand is that when people do not feed spiritual hunger for God with spiritual things in their homes, families, and marriages, when they only feed on donkeys' heads and dove's dung and carnality and think that's enough to hold your marriage and bless your family, when you only feed on carnal things and do not feed your spiritual hunger for God, guess what? I'm hoping that someone will hear my sermon and say, "I won't be able to have another year like this one. I can't stay in this addiction for another year. I'm not going to live like this again. Something has to give. I'm desperate, and I have a hunger for God that only God can fix, fulfill, and do in my family and in my home." The Bible said in Lamentations 4:9, "To be slain with the sword is better than to be slain with hunger." One translation said, "It's better to go down fighting than to sit there and die. For good or bad, hunger drives you." In the Bible, Esau returned home from a hunting trip. He was so hungry, but his brother Jacob came out and said, but I'll offer you a bowl of beans if you'll give me the birthright. God declares that there are some things hunger will lead you to that you will never find unless you hunger for me, because I have everything. I am the one who raises one and lowers another. And do you know what he promised in Matthew 5? Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Matthew 5:6. They that hunger and thirst for righteousness shall be filled. The Bible said that Esau lost his birthright because he fed that real hunger with donkeys' heads, so to speak, and dove's dung, instead of a hunger for God. I'll end with this. What enticed the prodigal son to leave the pigpen? What compelled him to return to his father's house? What exactly was it? It wasn't the odor or stench. It wasn't the betrayal of friends who had abandoned him after he had spent all of his money. It wasn't the filth in which he was living. None of these things led him back to his father's house. There was one thing that drew him back to his father's house. He posed a question in Luke 15:17. How many of my father's servants have bread enough to spare? Listen, and I perish with hunger. Hunger is what causes prodigal sons and daughters when someone fasts for them. Hunger wakes them up in the pigpen. Hunger will cause them to become aware of their compulsions. When we begin to fast, when we begin to pray for our families, for our sons, for our daughters, when we do that, God says, I will use hunger as the force that drives and pushes them onto the path back to the Father's house. When nothing else works, Jesus said in Mark 9, this kind cometh not out by fasting and prayer. There are some of our family members, friends, associates, people you work with, people you live with who are lost, and the only thing that will get them out of the muck and mire and back to the Father's house is hunger. This kind of spirit will only loose and release its grip on people when people are fasting and praying.